Yes, a very warm welcome to all of you to our last talk of this semester's lecture series from our binational PhD program, Becoming Entangled. And I'm very happy that Linde X made her way to Bremen from Groningen. And I think some of you already know her because she was, on the one hand, she's also a PhD student in the Groningen program, and some of you already met her. And on the other hand, some of you attended the workshop Linde was conducting yesterday, which was also very much in connection to her work. But before she will present her work and her artistic PhD and her project and also other projects, I would like to introduce you a bit to the audience who don't know you yet. So Linde is an artistic researcher, artist and a teacher, and she has a very interesting background. She did a BA in art education at the University of Utrecht, and then worked for several years in the free scene in Amsterdam. And the aim of your company project, your theater project, was really to work on situations, to work on topics. You mentioned the finance crisis, and to go into companies and really to work with them. You said you worked with the bank to change their policies through art projects. It would be also very interesting to hear about this maybe later in the discussion and later. But today you're also or mainly here to present your PhD project. We are very curious because it is 3 parts, and you will present to us the 2 first parts you already researched. And what I find very interesting about your research is that it's very much connected also to research methods from science. So you've got sometimes you've got situations and like Versuchsaufbau to really get into your questions. Your PhD, Lens Shades and Sooth-Scapes, and your talk we will hear now is much connected to more than human questions. For you, it's important not only to see the cartographies of the land, but also to think of more than human entities. You work with them. And I heard that also in the workshop, which took place in our academy garden, Wartengarten, was very interesting, and you did drawings with the participants together. And it seems to be also a very interesting connection to the history of the garden, to the entities living there, and to the situations you found. Would be very interested also to hear about this. So to come back to your biography, after the project in Amsterdam, you went back to Groningen to study at the Frank Moore Institute to do some arts and design, and then you continued doing your PhD now, and you're also teaching at the Minerva University for the Arts. So help me to welcome again Linde X, and we are very curious to hear from you, Linde.
Yeah. Well, I'm very honored that you're all here, and I don't think I have to tell much more about my background because that is done. I would like to start with saying one tiny thing before we start that is not on the content, and then I will stay on the content, because I tremble. And that is a thing that runs in my family. We all do that. No, not all. Some are spared from this minor mistake in our genetics. But I have it. So I'm a bit nervous, but not as nervous as you will see from my trembling hands. So I always say that at the beginning so people don't get distracted from that. Usually I start talks with this photo. It's a photo from a series that has been going on continuously since I think 4 or 5 years ago, and where I photograph with snapshots on my phone insects that land on me or in my surroundings. And sometimes it leads to very dangerous situations because I bike a lot. We're the bike country. And then I see one on my arm and I have to get my phone and, you know. So with risk of my own life, I do this project. But I think this photo describes quite well what I'm interested in. And that is how I, as a human and an artist, can connect to other life forms or non-human others around me. And I see that very broad. So from things that are not visible with the bare eye to whole landscapes that I see as entities, kind of. In that whole process, I always stumble upon my own humanness that I cannot escape. And I think there's a very interesting play of attempts to connect to other life forms that are not human. So, and I say on purpose attempts, because that is also a very important aspect in my work, I think. And I discovered that a couple of years ago, that I really want to work in a poetic way. So I don't want to, although I really value artists who are very activistic, but I think my approach is always to be quite unsure and to be quite indirect in how I research. I want to introduce a couple of projects. The first project I will talk about is Living Lines of the Barely Noticeable. That is also the first project of my artistic PhD, which started already before my PhD, but I will come back to that later. And then I will talk about a project about the landscape in the north of the Netherlands. And I will talk about that project because it introduces, in a way, the second project of my artistic PhD. So you get a bit of a feel for the things I do. And I will end with land-shaped Sooth-Scapes, which is the second project of my PhD, and which is about salt marshes, amongst others in the north of the Netherlands, but also in the UK. And that is a project that I'm in the middle of. So it's absolutely not finished or rounded up. I'm just completely immersed now in that, in that project. But first, Living Lines of the Barely Noticeable. And this started with an experience, and I will show you. Oh, heh. Do we see something? Oh, maybe I'll have to just... So I was in a field, a meadow, in the north of the Netherlands that I studied for 9 months. And while researching that field, I saw in January this. I hope you saw something because there's not a lot to see. And that was basically that there was not a lot to see, and that I was filming, and suddenly these creatures came into my camera lens. Was for me a very exciting experience, because there are not a lot of insects in January to see, but also I had some sort of an epiphany moment where I felt the urge to connect to these flying insects. And that moment stayed with me for a really long time, that I thought I need to find ways to understand this world that is so like fast and hard to grasp, and so very different from my own clumsy, protected against the rain and the winds human body. Yeah? So this was the first reason to start this project, and the other one was a scientific article published in around the same time about insect rates, so the insect amounts in Germany over 27 years. And this research was published, and it's had a super big impact, because the insect decline was almost 80% over 27 years. And maybe some people know this research, because it was published super bigly also in normal news media. So I saw it in the newspapers, and I saw it on television, and so from a lot of places this research was presented also to me as like a non-scientific person. And it generated also within the scientific world a lot of research into insect populations. So it was a catalyst to a lot of new research. And there was I chose to write a proposal for a grant, a travel grant, to travel in Germany, the east of Europe, or the north of Europe. And I proposed to go to those 63 places where the research was conducted over 27 years to study the insects that still live there in their living, flying state. Because for the research they had to, of course, catch the insects in traps, little tents, kind of, where they had to stop the movement of the insects to get to the data. So I made that proposal. I got the grant, which was very lucky. So I was able to travel to all those places. I bought a really tiny car and made my travels. And what I did there was that I just collected a lot of data. So I made a lot of videos, as you can see here, insects above a road. I made a lot of notes, drawings. I went to the University of Wageningen to talk to scientists about how they measure and collect data about insect flight movements. So I choose a lot of angles to do the research. Here are some of my notes with all the exact locations and times I was there, and I did a lot of. I conducted some technical tracing and mapping ways to understand the movements. But during the research, I more and more found that the best understanding of these movements I got through mimicking their movements with my hands. So I tried a lot of very technological and very advanced ways to understand these movements. And I did get more insight, I have to say. I did started to see patterns, for example, better because I knew about the scientific knowledge about that. But the scientific knowledge was done in a laboratory in a 60 by 60 tunnel where they mainly study 3 types of insects: bumblebees because they're big, mosquitoes because they're annoying and dangerous because of malaria, and bees because we have as humans an obsession with honeybees. So basically those 3 they knew something about, but how insects really move in groups in their natural environment, with wind changing their direction, and they don't know a lot about. And even I think if they would have known a lot about it, the best way I felt I could understand them was through making the movements myself. And I started to do that quite intuitively. And yeah, all these, and another thing that was important is that I felt that through imaginations and stories, I also had some sort of an interest to their world, because insects are for centuries connected to the more than tangible world also, as like creatures who can move between the spiritual world and the tangible world. And imagination was also a tool for me to get closer to that. I grew up with a lot of fairy tale books and elves and things like that, so there was an entrance there. And in the end it resulted in 3 types of works. I made a lot of drawings, so I made some sort of a 2D language of their movements and very different types. I made an installation that studied basically how the movements presented themselves in space, and also the capacities of these insects. You see them usually as light reflections or as silhouettes. So especially with the small ones, you don't see their bodies really because they move so quickly. And so I studied that aspect of them in these works. And another thing I did was that I worked with a choreographer from Berlin and a group of dancers on making basically a set of rules, you can say, for improvisation, to also connect to the insects through movement, human movement. And we filmed this because of COVID. We couldn't do a real presentation. We filmed this on a roof, a parking roof of a supermarket in Berlin, with a grid. And that part was important to me because the insects, one of the biggest reasons of their decline is the fragmentation of the landscape. So they don't really have, when the food is gone in a certain spot, they cannot go to another because there's a big agricultural land usually in between that they cannot cross. So the videos were made with videos strapped on their bodies. So you have perspectives from moving perspectives from their bodies, and videos made with a drone to get more of an oversight of the group and how they interact. So yeah, that was that is my first project, and I just finished the article about it, where I put it more in a cultural context, where I talk about these elements of imagination and embodiment and other elements that I've found in the research, without explaining the works too much, because that is kind of a big deal for me, that I don't want to do that too much. Up to the project that brings me a little bit closer to my second PhD project, because it's set in the same landscape basically. And this is a project that was called What If, and it was commissioned by 2 art institutions in Groningen that worked together, and they asked me and another artist, what if, and then ... the future of the landscape. That was our briefing. I came up with a plan to study what would happen if we don't live with the dikes anymore. And this is a little map that I made for my proposal, and it's painted with silt, so the clay, the very muddy stuff that is in the Waddenzee, and basically the white places are the ones that will stay completely dry after we break all the dikes, and the rest will be covered, not all the time in water. It will not be that bad, but once a year or something there will be a meter of water or something like that. That is what I have been told by scientists. For me it was interesting to start researching this scenario in kind of a with a bit of humor. I wanted to do it. So what I did is I made square meters of grass, because a lot of the land in the north is grass. It's grassland with cows and sheep and stuff like that. Also potatoes, a lot of potatoes. But I thought I'd take a very general piece of land and I put it at the seashore in 3 places, and I will see what happens to them. And as you can see, there's a little clay ball on it. And that is a reference to the living mounds that people used to live on in these areas when there were no dikes. So they made little mounds and they put a farm on it, and then they lived there. So I thought I scale this situation back to very small, and then I let the landscape do what it wants. And then a couple of weeks later, I come back and I will see what happens. And of course, the forces on this model are huge, way bigger than a real situation. Here you see by the Eems, at the beach, a little beach at the Eems. And there, the Eems is between Germany and the Netherlands. So it's connecting, it's the border between the 2 countries. And here what happened was that the model just completely disappeared. I have no idea. I think it just went under the sand, because I found pieces of it sticking very deep, but I dug and there was something still there, but it was, this one was just kind of vanished. This one, however, was beautifully coated in a layer of silt with a lot of life in it. It was like inhabited by worms and tiny mini crabs, and very interesting. This was in the tidal harbor in Noordpolderzijl, and that is one of 3 tidal harbors still left in the Netherlands. And here I put one at the big harbor in Lauwersoog, where the boats leave for the islands, and there's some industrial activity too. And this one was completely tossed around, and also a lot of animals living in it, big crabs, and yeah. So for me, this was a very interesting research because I saw like super different powers on this model. Well, I did a lot of material tests and reading into what lives there and all that. And then later I had an exhibition with my co-artist, and we presented the research in drawings. I made videos. There was this, you see here still a corner. We made some sort of a landscape with water that flows in all the time and continuously changes the shapes in that landscape. And I thought I wanted to translate the situation back. So where I first made everything miniature, I now blew it back to the normal proportions, but with all the life in it. So then a siltworm that is usually this big is suddenly 20 meters. So I made a 20-meter siltworm that was going through the gallery and painted with silt also. Yeah, it was a really fun project. A lot of yeah, it was nice to do. And also for me, what was important is that I got a better understanding. I made basically the small life more important and more visible, and I felt like I had a better understanding also of all this small life that is there, and that is so important also for the whole ecosystem, but that we don't really see. And this is one of quite a lot of projects that I have been doing on the Dutch coastal landscape in the north. For some reason, I got asked back and back on projects on this landscape. And now I'm doing one again about the landscape. And that is the project that we worked on yesterday in the workshop. And it's called Land Shapes Sooth-Scapes. And basically, it is a research into salt marshes in Edinburgh, there, Barrow-in-Furness in the north of England, and the Waddenzee in Groningen. What interests me about these landscapes is that they have, and I think what connects all the three projects in my artistic PhD is that they are quite common in a way. A lot of the human population lives near or in delta landscapes and salt marshes. It's very fertile ground, easy access to water, logistically super easy to live. And so it has something like common, and also maybe when I talk to international students in Groningen, they always find it super boring, the landscape, because it's flat and it is grey and it is a lot of shades of grey and green, and that is basically it if you look at it for the first time. So there is this idea of it of being boring. I had the same, I have to say, because I'm from quite a different landscape. It is also quite exposed. So the other day I really had to go to the loo. I had to pee, but there's no place to hide. It's absolutely exposed. So it feels, I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable there, although we all live there. So there's a lot of paradoxes and Uh, things like that. Not all live there, but a lot of humans, decided to live in landscapes like this. So, so for me, it in that sense, it's a very interesting landscape, and it connects also with the insects, because they're both very things we see all day, but also want to wave away and not really look at. So I started to do this journey, and I learned more and more about salt marshes, in the specifics of salt marshes, because I knew about the local situation in the Waddenzee, and that for example, they're super important in storing carbon, much more important than forests. That they play a big role in coastal protection, that they're very important for the life cycle in the sea and on land. So the importance of these is very big, but only 50% is now still remain. So we are it's very easy to like transform them just into agricultural land, or if you have big dikes, which we have in the Netherlands. So here you see that landscape which I talked about, with a lot of grey, and I think it's beautiful, but a lot of people disagree with me. Yeah. And then I thought, how do you engage with a landscape that is so diffuse, where everything merges into each other? You know, the water is also the land and the air, and everything is basically streams into each other. Then I saw these shapes in Barrow and Furness. And I thought, basically, actually, there are a lot of like quite distinct shapes here. And I started thinking about ways of reading things. So maybe I can connect to the land by reading it and engaging with it in that way. Like people read hands, for example, the lines in hands, or the coffee in Turkey. When you drink the coffee, what remains in it, you can read. Or in indigenous cultures, they read sticks, you know, that lay in certain patterns. So I thought, can I not read in a way, or connect through the landscape in a way like that, basically a magical way. When I saw these shapes, I thought maybe I can do this. Maybe I can create a lexicon of shapes to get closer to the landscape and start interacting and reading the landscape, to also evoke stories from the landscape, let's say. And then I started to see how all these shapes are very interconnected. So here you see the dike in the Netherlands. It's 12 meters high, so it's really a wall. And it protects us from the sea. Yeah? But it also really shapes the landscape. So the landscape on this side is on the land side is very, very different than the landscape as you saw here. No, where were we? Here on the seaside. So we create a lot of elements in the landscape that shape the landscape, and even on the seaside, this is the side of the sea, you see a lot of human interactions. So you see here the lines. Yeah, the straight lines, because in the Netherlands we use the salt marshes also to protect the dikes again. So we make structures in the landscape like this to create a grid, basically, where the nature is allowed to develop in. So you see in this landscape a lot of shapes that have angles. So the plants here are growing in angles, in squares and in triangles, which is a bit odd, of course. But if you don't, once I started to look at shapes, I started seeing stuff like that. And before I didn't really see it. I, of course, saw it, but I didn't see how the shapes told me that story, basically. And in Barrow-in-Furness, you see there's a lot of industry. It's a very industrial town. It basically was founded when people found iron ore, so the ground, the base material for steel and iron, and so it has a bit of an American feel. It's where like a settler's feel. You know, everything is from around 1850 or something, 1900s. Here you see, for example, that they built a big pier of waste of iron ore, and that created a bay on one side where the shapes in the land are very different from the other side, but also from other areas that I went to. So a human waste product created very different shapes on the other side, like these. And for me, they are very different because I saw so many shapes now. In Edinburgh, you have a lot of coal industry, and you see here the little beach there that is black. The coal industry stopped years ago, like 80 years ago or something, but the coal still ends up on the coast, the coal dust, and it also creates shapes there. So here you see coal dust on the beach. So for me this was very interesting, that I started to see connections, basically interactions between humans and non-humans, between history and the present circumstances of weather, for example. And basically I was doing something a bit artificial, right? I'm just taking out shapes of a landscape which feels a bit strange because they don't really have edges in a way. There's a shape there, but where does it stop and where does it end and where does it begin? But by forcing myself to really look at shapes, I started to see, oddly enough, relationships between things. So that for me was quite a big revelation. Here you see shapes from Barrow, and what I also found that there was some sort of a shape language. So here in Barrow, the shapes are all quite friendly, quite round, and it's hard to describe. I think if you see a lot of them, you will see what I mean. And the shapes in Edinburgh were much more whimsical and erratic, even the ones in the salt marshes. I felt in the water a lot in the salt marshes in Edinburgh because the little canals between the shapes, between the islands, were invisible a lot of times. So I had very soaked feet, and it was, it felt a bit more whimsical and erratic, all the shapes there, yeah. And in the Netherlands, this is from the dike. We have the tendency to make everything kind of square and easily to overlook. So that is reflected in the shapes. Here you see what I said, the oddly shaped plant groups. There were a lot of shapes are also have to do in the Netherlands with sheep or cows, because we let them on the salt marshes to keep the grass short and to protect basically the salt marshes and therefore the dikes. So there are a lot of these footprints of animals. So basically a lot of very different shapes per landscape also, although there are also, of course, connections and things that bind the three places. I don't know how far am I? It's, I forgot to. Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I started to see more and more like connections and differences and how shapes are created. And what was funny yesterday in the group, we talked also about that it's sometimes quite annoying that you constantly have to look for shapes. You know, you get annoyed by it. It's like, yeah, I just want to walk here, or I want to do something else. But I kind of like to give myself rules to really focus on the steps I take in the research, and this focus on shapes really helped me to start seeing these relations and oddities and interesting aspects of the landscape. And another thing that was important and that I'm now in the middle of is drawing, because I decided to take from each landscape a collection of shapes and to draw them. Because in the drawing process you have to make even more decisions. So the aspect of defining the borders of the shape, and I had to continuously solve problems of these shapes, but therefore I was confronted with the reality of the shapes, if you know what I mean. So it was all the decisions you make in the drawing process make you understand the shape better in a more personal way also, because I'm the one making the decisions and I can only do it in the way I decide in that moment. So it created a personal relationship between me and the shapes. So here you see some of the shapes. And what was also interesting is that the shapes became like the very small shapes, the delicate shapes, became as important as the really big shapes. So I could connect to different skill levels also through the shapes. Yeah. Here's some more. Some shapes I also found really not nice. So you really start to communicate with the landscape through the shapes. This one, for example, I don't like it, because it's like an organic form and then that weird triangle thing on top, but it is what it was, and those are the most prominent elements in that photo. So it's basically, if you leave out all the things around it, this is what you actually see. So it really became a way of relating to the landscape through the drawing process. And I'm not really interested necessarily in the drawings as end results, but more in the process of drawing. And therefore, I also in the coming months, years, I will go back to a couple of times even to Barrow in Furness and to Edinburgh and to the Wadden also, to expand on the lexicon of shapes with local communities. So here you see Barrow, and these people are basically living in the salt marshes. They made like a little, they're a little bit higher, but this will not take long before they have to move. This is not really doable. And in the UK, the policy is not to protect, but just to surrender to what is happening with climate change and sea level risings. So this island that we're looking at will just disappear. And so these people have also, I think, kind of an urgency to work with the landscape and to connect to the landscape and to maybe approach it in a different way because they live next to it. And I also hope to learn a lot from them because they probably see and know much more also because they live so close to it. So I think by expanding the collection, not only through my work but through community activities, we can create a base to later, talk about these landscapes. And the idea is to make walks there and let the communities make drawings, the participants, to add to the collection, but also to talk about what these shapes mean to them or to the whole community. I'm now creating furniture pieces to do that on. So we will sit on the shapes also in a 3D form made from materials from the landscape. So I use wool because of the sheep, the amount of sheep everywhere, especially in the Netherlands. I use coal, I use iron ore, I use seaweeds, silt elements from the landscapes. And we will sit on them and hopefully we will get to interesting conversations about these landscapes. And I thought I will end with this photo of yesterday because we did a bit of a similar thing, and this was also for me an experiment, I think, or a joint experiment of me and the people who participated, and we drew shapes from the garden. And wrote poems and observations, and we had a talk about it. And I will bundle all this in a book and send it back here to be used in the library or something. So you have a bit of a shape archive, a mini shape archive of the garden. Yeah.
Impressive and very rich material and artworks and questions you raised. I'm wondering if there are already some questions or you need to digest. Harm?
Hello, thank you. It was very inspiring to see your artworks again, some of them. I mean, I saw some in Groningen already. And I think my first question would be about the instructions. You were in the first project referring to instructions you gave to the performers. Or I don't know if you used the word instructions, but kind of like these movements they were about to do.
Yeah.
And does this also have an educational background in a way, or do you only apply that in this very situation on the rooftop, or is there also, like, do you use these instructions for further projects or for interactive work somehow?
Yeah, good questions, thank you. The instructions I developed with the choreographer. So I had all the notes and the research and also the gestures, and then we talked about it, and we indeed made a set of rules for the dancers to improvise with. So we didn't make a real choreography, but we just gave a set of rules. And during practicing, we also changed the rules because we thought of something, but it didn't feel right, or it didn't. It wasn't close enough to my experiences, or. So we tweaked quite a lot in the rehearsal process. So the exact set of rules changed. What we, for example, what we're got focused on later was much more the interaction between the dancers than the movements they made. So we had this. For example, we said. You can use your arms, and you can go up and down. You have to go up and down as much as possible. You can use your arms in a certain way, and then he explained it, which ways they could do their arms. Also, not this and stuff like that. Yeah. So there were like you always have to have one arm higher than the other, so there must be a asymmetry in it. So rules like that we had, but the rules we tweaked the most were the rules where they had to interact with each other, because what tend to happen is that it stayed very organized. But we wanted them to like bump into each other and go out, and so these insects they in a way interact with each other as a group. So we said one is the leader, and you decide amongst yourselves who that is during the process all the time. So it also changes all the time, and that was a big step in the development of making it more, closer to what I saw with the insects, because one was the leader and the rest followed, but they also had to do their own thing because suddenly someone else could be the leader. So that changed the interaction a lot between the dancers, and the educational aspect. The problem of this project was, of course, COVID. I had it was really troublesome for me because I couldn't, every time there were measures here, they were not in the Netherlands or the other way around. It was a complete disaster. So I was very happy that we could do this. And for a conference, I did want to try to do these movements, especially the gestures, in an audience setting. But furthermore, we weren't able to develop it because of restraints. But it can be a methodology to further investigate or.
Just quickly, how long did you rehearse?
Super shortly because of all these reasons. Yeah, so we had a week. Not every day. So a couple of meetings before, and then
Yeah, thanks a lot for the talk. It's really nice. It also resonates a lot with me, the topics that you are talking about or exploring now. And I don't know if I would, I don't know what is my question per se, but I really somehow echoed with me this, what you were saying about these people who were living in the UK, in this system, and then that somehow you have to surrender to this situation that is happening of climate change now.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, how is your, in your research, how does this play? Because I think there's a big emotional component. For example, I come from El Salvador, and I think through some time there will be some, in Central America, there's a lot of change in relation to how much rain it falls because of climate crisis. And I think I slowly, I don't go there so often, of course, but now I see that the climate is changing, and then in some areas become drier, and then this changes the landscape. And I think all of us would somehow have to deal emotionally with this, let's say, not slow, but process of landscapes changing as we know them now. And I just wonder, how are you thinking about it also, because you talk with communities in a way, So I know you talked about it a bit more, but maybe I'm just curious to see what is your thoughts about this.
Yeah. This is a really good question, especially because I am in the process of thinking about questions like this, because I will go back to Edinburgh in September, and then I will go back the year after to do these projects. So I have quite a lot of time to really think about it, but I will do a pilot project in July in the Netherlands with a group, or groups, basically. We do, I think, 2 weeks with groups going into the salt marshes. And these are things I really have to think about. I didn't do a lot of participatory projects, so this is also for me quite a new... I did a lot of participatory projects in my company, but not on my own as an artist. So I really have to think about how to approach this, and I want to stay away from being therapeutic. I'm not a therapist. And also I want to stay away from too much activism, because I feel like that is not my role or something. I feel uncomfortable in that role. I do, however, want to connect stories, and then preferably on another level than the actual reality that we live in. Maybe more on a more magical level, or a more imaginatory level. Maybe my first thought would be to go quite speculative, so more oriented to the future. So what is the landscape telling us? What can we do here? How can we live with the landscape? Instead of pointing back to trauma and drama that is presently there. I think I will feel more comfortable with that, and I'm also more experienced in that. Yeah. I hope that answered it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Linde, for this interesting insights into your research and all this great material. I have more something like a general question again to this shape.
Yeah, shape.
Looking to the shape. No? In my mind, you mentioned it also. You said, I think, at the beginning also something about pattern. No? Mm-hmm. So I was also asking me a bit difference between shape and pattern, and understanding. Mm-hmm. You said I want to understand the other, the landscape, or in connection with the insects, the other life. You said, and I was asking me what happens if you observe and see a shape. Which shape is it? The shape from the other or from you?
Yeah.
And how the shape you see in the other changes the other. And that's for me more something, as you see, a bit of theoretical question, but also ethical question, how to observe.
Yeah.
And and that's for me. I worked a lot on patterns and also on shapes.
Yeah.
That's why I'm very interested in this relation, but in connection with cartography.
Yeah.
But it's a bit. This question is a bit also connected to cartography, no? And landscape has this connection.
Yeah.
So that was one question for me, no? Thinking about this and what happens with understanding and observing. No? Is it your understanding? And the other question was also probably a bit connected to the question from Victor, was the context. I was asking me, you are going to the, as I have understood it, you go to the landscape, and how important is the context? Do you research also before or parallel or? And you said a bit you are interested in this speculative, magical connections, but is there still? Isn't it still necessary or important or to know a bit of how do you get to know about this landscape?
Yeah.
More?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I will answer the last one first. Is that okay? Yeah. Because it's the project is called Landscapes, Sooth-Scapes. So for me, the part of landscapes is making this lexicon of shapes, but also getting context and background of how and why and when the shapes were formed or are there, or relations. So for the written part of this project, I will invite experts. It will be a co-written article. So we'll invite experts on specific questions I have on those elements to basically have a conversation with each other and with me about these elements. So that is the first part, and then the second part is the more speculative, magical part, where I again invite experts, but maybe not only experts in the common sense of the word, but I want to also invite soothsayers, hand readers, or people who work with this reading of shapes. So it will be quite a fun collection of experts who will share ideas with me. And for example, I'm very interested in Robert McFarlane, his book Landmarks, where he talks about basically a similar approach, the disappearance of words, describing very specific elements in the landscape. And yeah, I can imagine asking someone like him to also reflect on this, making shapes more specific and then reflecting upon that. Because what he says is basically, because we lost words to describe specific elements, we lost the landscape. Yeah, so you don't see them anymore. If there's a specific word for describing a stone that shines in the full moon or something, and you lose that word, you maybe don't see the stone anymore in that way. I think the context will come from the co-written background of this, and that will go parallel with the rest of the research. So I will travel and make also with my hands, and I will talk to people and write. So it will be a parallel process. And the first question was about, I hope that answered it a little bit. The first question was about shapes and understanding shapes. Yeah. And the other, yeah. For me, understanding is not necessarily the how we commonly normally see understanding. So I see understanding more as as I said in the beginning, as attempts, a series of attempts to try to understand, basically, and not as knowledge that you have and that is fixed and stable and solid, because I don't really believe in that kind of knowledge. So to me, the understanding part is is very much a process. So it's about a series of attempts to get closer, and sometimes that fails, and sometimes you feel like you're closer. So it's a very intuitive process also. Can you help me a little bit with?
Then if I would reduce it a bit, my question, my question was: do you see your shape? No?
Yeah, of course,
and not the shape of the other, no? And how this seeing of that you see the shape, no? And it's your shape and not the shape of the other, no? Changes the other. That was my question.
Yeah, I just wrote down a sentence because I was reading a book, and I think that is exactly what it is to me. In New Zealand, they gave a river legal person rights, right? And they say there, I am the river and the river is me. And I think that is the case. I mean, there is no me or you in that sense. You're always in conversation, and I change the other and the other changes me. So it's more of a conversation than a ownership or something. I own the shape now. No, I don't see it like that. And what we talked about yesterday, what was very interesting, is that some people saw shapes there that were very present to them. And they thought everyone would have seen that shape. But no one photographed it or saw it. So what is very important to me is, of course, not very important to someone else. But that is not what the project is about. It's just about ways of looking and of engaging. And that is also why other people are also going out there to do similar things and add to the lexicon of shapes. Yeah.
And thanks a lot for your presentation. And I was thinking as you were presenting, those places look grey and so on. Some people doesn't like it. I like those places a lot. I want to tell. Yeah. And I'm also visiting partly in one of the places in North Germany. And my experience is like it is amazingly silent, like in a sense, and you can constantly see that the landscape is changing.
Yeah.
Like there's water, and it depends also the tides. That's why it's probably very related to the moon calendar and so on.
Yeah.
So there are some probably algorithmic informations at the background which are playing with it. And in the meantime, what I was thinking was on those drawings that which you made, or the last pieces that you have shown. Those, I felt like that. If at first I seen them as in fragments which has been taken out of the space in a sense, but then I was like, okay, but it's somehow lively due to symbiotics. I mean, they are symbiotic with each other. I mean, they are not. It's not just I just draw the water, but you draw in the meantime those neighbors of it, and they are in connections, and I find that very important in a sense, because the drawing has then a kind of an animating character. Like it doesn't stop over there as just an art object, but it is happening something in between those different parts, fragments. And but I was going to ask, and do you know maybe the geomancy, the ilm al-ralm? This is the Arabic medieval science for reading this. It's called the science of sand, but it is totally contrast project, maybe in a sense,
Yeah.
because yours is fluid, right? And but they do read. I mean, they used to, but there are some probably shamanistic cultures as well, or Islamic cultures that they are practicing still. And they are really disciplined on it. They have those algorithms, and they can understand the future, and I understand in their sense, and in their belief, they can understand the future, and so on. And so I was thinking, like, okay, this is, I mean, it doesn't have to go to that scientific direction, but in a sense, it is possible to understand those forms. And those are for all the symbiotic ones. They are not like fragments of this stone, but it's a stone with the water a bit and mud and so on.
Yeah. I think you're right. I through the drawings, I saw them more and more as interconnected elements. So you see reflections of things in the water, and you see. So the interactions and the relations for me became much clearer through the drawings than in the photographs. That was a real epiphany, let's say. To go on to your comment about the sand reading, and I think that Sooth-Scapes part really asks for different approaches to this reading. So maybe we need a very scientific way of reading shapes. There is a science actually about reading the landscapes. It's geomorphology. So it's the science of reading shapes in the land, literally. But not the shapes I draw, not the ones that change every couple of minutes, or that. But maybe I want to invite someone like that, but also someone, maybe a sand reader who has very specific ways of doing it, and maybe someone who create stories out of these shapes. And again, a lot of angles to this this element of reading and interacting with the landscape. So I would love to hear and get in contact with some sand readers. Would be amazing. Yeah. That is the problem, but also the advantage, I think, of presenting a project in the middle of it, because I get really good ideas now, and I will write them all down. But there's also a lot of questions still, and I think it's also nice to have a lot of questions still. Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe this is a very nice end word of your ongoing project and of a very interesting evening we had. I've got several questions, but maybe we can also talk later, because everybody is also invited to join us in the Feuerwache. We will go to have dinner there, and if you like also to have dinner there, you are very much invited. Thank you very much, Linde, again.
Yeah, thank you too.
And we are very curious to hear about the continuation of your very interesting narrations. Thank you very much.